planet was unlike any other the human soldier David had ever seen. Towering mountains rose high into the sky, their peaks covered in snow despite the heat of the planet's equator. Beneath them stretched vast forests of strange trees, their leaves glowing with a soft light. The air had a sweet metallic scent, and the sky was a deep purple, with 2 moons shining brightly in the distance. David was standing on the surface, waiting for the arrival of the alien delegation. David was part of a diplomatic mission, sent to help establish a peaceful relationship between humanity and the alien species known as the Draxians. The Draxians were highly advanced, both technologically and culturally. They had little interest in war, but their pride was unmatched, and their way of life was fiercely guarded. Too many, they were mysterious, almost untouchable. They rarely interacted with other species unless necessary, and even then, they kept their distance. As he waited, David couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. He had trained for moments like this, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality. He wasn't just meeting any alien. He was about to meet the Draxian princess, the heir to their throne. The sound of soft footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Turning around, David saw her. The princess. She was tall, her skin a deep shade of purple, with long silver hair that shimmered like starlight. Her eyes, large and mesmerizing, were a piercing shade of violet. Her movements were graceful, almost ethereal, and her presence commanded attention. Even in the quiet solitude of the planet's surface, David had heard stories about her, how she had never once shown emotion, how her beauty was renowned across the galaxy. The Princess Lyra was known to be as cold and stoic as the Draxian royal family, a symbol of their pride and dignity. No one had ever seen her laugh or even smile. She was the perfect princess, flawless in every way, as she approached. David stood up straighter, trying to hide the nervousness he felt. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew one thing. This meeting could set the tone for future relations between their species. "Princess Lyra," David said, bowing slightly. "It's an honor to meet you." Lyra stopped in front of him, her eyes scanning him as if evaluating every aspect of his being. David was about to say something else when, to his surprise, she spoke. "Are the human diplomat?" Her voice was soft but carried a sense of authority. David nodded, a little caught off guard by how her voice seemed to echo in his mind. "Yes, I am. My name is David." Lyra studied him for a moment longer, then gave a small nod. "You are much different than I expected." David blinked, not sure how to respond to that. "Different your kind. They speak often of peace, but your actions have been ... inconsistent." Lyra's gaze didn't leave him, though there was something almost curious in her expression. "Well, we're not perfect," David said, offering a half smile. "But we try." For a moment, there was silence between them. David wondered if his comment had been too casual. But before he could say anything more, Lyra spoke again, her tone almost playful. "Do you always speak so freely?" David felt his heart skip a beat. He had read all the protocols and diplomatic guidelines, and he knew he was supposed to be formal and serious in the presence of royalty. But something about Lyra made him feel at ease. Without thinking, he said, "Only when I'm not trying to impress someone too much." Lyra's eyes widened slightly, and for the briefest moment David thought he saw something akin to surprise flicker across her face. But it was gone just as quickly as it had appeared. "You're not like the others," she said quietly. David shrugged. "Well, I'd like to think I'm not your average diplomat." There was another long pause. Lyra seemed to consider his words. Then, much to David's surprise, she did something he hadn't expected at all. She smiled. It was a small smile. Almost shy, but it was a smile nonetheless. David blinked in disbelief. He had heard that the Draxian royal family was known for being reserved and unapproachable, yet here she was, smiling at him. The realization hit him hard, and he quickly turned his gaze away to hide his reaction. His heart was pounding in his chest, and he couldn't understand why. "Why did you smile?" he asked, before he could stop himself. "I didn't mean to offend you." Lyra's smile widened a little, and she took a step closer to him. "You were the first to speak so freely to me. Perhaps I enjoy that more than I should." David raised an eyebrow, unsure if she was joking or being serious. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." She shook her head. "No, you didn't." She looked at him with a curious glint in her eyes. "I find it interesting." David's mind raced. This was unlike anything he had expected from a royal encounter. He had anticipated a cold reception, an exchange of formal words, maybe even some diplomatic tension. But here she was, an alien princess, smiling and laughing, and he didn't know what to make of it. Finally, after a long pause, he chuckled. "Well, I guess we're both a little out of our element, huh?" Lyra blinked, then slowly she laughed. The sound was like music, light, melodic, and completely unexpected. David laughed too, feeling an odd sense of relief wash over him. The tension between them seemed to vanish in that moment. And for the first time since arriving on this strange planet, David felt like he wasn't just talking to a ruler. He was talking to a person. They both stood there, laughing, the sound echoing in the vast, quiet landscape of the alien world. It was a moment of connection, the kind David hadn't expected to find, especially not with someone as powerful and important as Princess Lyra. But there they were, two individuals from different worlds, laughing together. The sun had set, casting long shadows across the alien landscape. The sky was now painted in shades of purple and orange, and the two moons of the planet glowed softly, their light reflecting off the strange metallic trees. David and Princess Lyra were walking side by side through the royal gardens, their conversation flowing more easily now. The laughter from earlier still lingered in the air. David couldn't help but feel a sense of warmth towards her. Lyra, usually so composed and distant, seemed different now. The smile that had appeared on her face earlier was not gone, and there was a softness in her eyes that he hadn't expected from someone of her status. They had been talking about the customs of her people, about the planet's history, and about the future. The more they spoke, the more David realized how much he had misjudged her. For all her regal beauty and strength, Lyra was just like him in some ways, human, in a sense. She had fears, dreams, and a life that was not as perfect as it appeared on the surface. "I never understood why my people keep to themselves so much," Era said quietly, her voice tinged with a hint of sadness. "We are so proud of our achievements. Our traditions ... but it's lonely. It's always been lonely." David glanced at her, sensing there was more to the story. He had heard the legends of the Draxian royal family, how they were almost untouchable, how their emotions were often hidden behind a wall of duty and tradition. But this side of Lyra was something he hadn't expected to see. "You've never had anyone to talk to?" David asked, careful not to sound too intrusive. She shook her head slowly. "I have my advisors, my guards, my people. But they only speak to me because of my title. They never see me as a Lyra. It's always Princess. I've never been allowed to choose my own path?" She paused, her eyes flickering with a momentary vulnerability. "I was never allowed to make my own decisions. Not until now. Not until you came." David stopped walking for a moment, turning to face her. "You mean the path they've chosen for you? It's not what you want?" Lyra's gaze dropped to the ground, and she nodded. "I'm expected to marry, to form alliances, to keep the empire strong. But I don't want that. I don't want to be just another pawn in a game that I didn't choose to play." David's heart softened. He had always admired Lyra from afar, but now hearing her speak so openly, he saw her as more than just a powerful princess. She was someone who had been trapped in a world of expectations, unable to live for herself. "I understand, David," said quietly, his voice sincere. "I can't imagine what it must be like to have everything planned for you, to never get a chance to live the way you want. But you don't have to stay in that cage." She looked up at him then, her violet eyes meeting his. There was something in her gaze, something raw and real. "I don't know how to change it. I've been trained to be this way my entire life. It's all I've ever known." David took a deep breath, feeling a surge of empathy. I can help. You, he said, his words coming out before he had time to think about them. You deserve a chance to be free. You deserve to live your life how you want, not how others want you to. Lyra stared at him as though considering his words. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, slowly, she stepped closer to him, her eyes searching his face. You're serious, aren't you? She asked softly. David nodded. I am. I may be from a different world, but I can see you for who you truly are. Not just a princess, ... but a person. You deserve more than what you've been given. For the first time since they met, Lyra's expression softened even more, and she gave him a small, genuine smile. You're kind, she said. I don't think anyone has ever said something like that to me before. David felt a strange warmth spread through him at her words. He hadn't expected to connect with her so deeply, but now it seemed impossible to ignore the bond that was forming between them. He had come to this planet with a mission, to negotiate peace between their worlds, but now he found himself more focused on helping Lyra find a way to escape the constraints of her royal life. You deserve to make your own decisions. Lyra, David said, his voice soft but firm. If you want to change your life, you can. It's not easy, but it's possible. Lyra's eyes glimmered with a mix of hope and uncertainty. I don't know if I can leave everything behind, she said quietly. But the thought of being free ... of choosing my own path. It's something I've dreamed of for so long. David placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Then let's make it happen, together. They stood there for a moment, the quiet hum of the alien world around them. David could feel the weight of the decision ahead of them, how much it would change their lives, how dangerous it could be. But he didn't care. He knew that Lyra's happiness was worth any risk. We'll figure it out, David said, his voice filled with determination. You don't have to face this alone. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes filled with something he hadn't seen before, a spark of hope. She reached out, taking his hand gently, and for the first time. She spoke without the heavy weight of duty in her voice. Thank you, David, she whispered. You've already done more for me than anyone else ever has. David smiled, squeezing her hand. This is just the beginning, Lyra. They stood there together, their hands intertwined as the moons above cast their soft light over the royal gardens. The future was uncertain, but for the first time it seemed full of possibilities. The next few days passed quickly as David and Princess Lyra spent more time together. At first, their meetings had been short and formal as he continued his diplomatic duties. But now, their connection had grown stronger. They shared meals, walked through the palace gardens, and discussed everything from politics to personal dreams. The more time they spent together, the more they learned about each other. David found himself enjoying Lyra's company in a way he hadn't expected. He had always been focused on his mission, never thinking much about making personal connections. But with Lyra, it was different. There was something about her, something real and raw that made him want to protect her, to help her escape. From the rigid life she had been forced into, they would often talk about their childhoods. Lyra told him about her strict upbringing, how she was trained to be the perfect ruler, how she was never allowed to make her own decisions. She spoke of the heavy burden of being the heir to the Draxian throne and how she had always longed for freedom. But it wasn't just her royal life that weighed on her. It was the loneliness. It's the feeling of being trapped in a life that wasn't her own. David shared his own experiences with her, talking about growing up on Earth and the challenges he faced in joining the military. He told her about the battles he had fought and the friends he had lost, about the dreams he had of peace and a better future for humanity. But more than that, he told her about the simple joys of life, things like taking a walk in the rain or enjoying a warm meal with friends, or hearing the sound of laughter. One evening, after a long day of talks and negotiations, David and Lyra found themselves sitting together on a balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The sky was a deep shade of violet, and the twin moons were rising slowly above the horizon. The air was cool, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves of the alien trees below. It was a peaceful moment, and for a brief time it felt like the weight of the world had lifted off their shoulders. David looked over at Lyra, who was gazing out at the view, her expression thoughtful. You know, he said quietly, I never thought I'd be sitting here with you, talking like this. Lyra glanced at him, her lips curling into a small smile. And why is that? Shrugged a sheepish grin on his face. No, I guess I always imagined you'd be. Well, more distant, more untouchable, I guess. Lyra raised an eyebrow. Untouchable? Yeah, you're a princess. I thought you'd be all proper and distant, with no time for someone like me. He paused, then added, but I was wrong. Lyra chuckled softly, her eyes sparkling. And what made you change your mind? David leaned back in his chair, looking up at the stars. You're not like I imagined. You're single. Goat, you're just like me, trying to find your way in a world that doesn't always make sense. There was a quiet moment between them, the sound of distant birdsong filling the air. Then Lyra spoke again, her voice soft but sincere. I'm glad you see me that way, she said. For a long time I thought no one would ever understand. Not truly. David turned to her, meeting her gaze. I do understand. Maybe not everything, ... but I understand what it's like to feel trapped, to want something more. Lyra smiled again, and for a moment, David saw a different side of her, a side that wasn't the cold, distant princess he had first met. This was the real Lyra, the one who longed for freedom, for a life that wasn't dictated by duty and tradition, you know? She said, I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who only see me as the princess. They don't see me as a person, as someone who has dreams and fears, but with you. You don't see me as just a title. You see me as who I really am. David felt a warmth spread through him at her words. That's because I do see you, Lyra, not just as a princess, but as a person. I think that's what makes you special. They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. The peaceful quiet of the evening felt comforting, like a safe space where they could simply be themselves without the pressure of their roles. I want to change things, Lyra said suddenly, breaking the silence. I want to do more than just follow the path that's been laid out for me. I want to be free. I want to make my own choices. David turned to her, his heart beating faster. He had known this moment was coming. Lyra had always known she was trapped in her role, but now she was finally acknowledging it. It was a step toward the freedom she had longed for. You can, you know, David said gently. You don't have to do what they expect of you. You can choose your own path, Lyra. I'll help you. Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty and hope. But how? I've been trained for this my whole life. It's not easy to just walk away from everything. David reached out and took her hand in his. It won't be easy, but it's possible. You just have to take that first step, and I'll be with you every step of the way. Lyra looked at their joined hands, her thumb gently brushing over his fingers. She'd never imagined she would be sitting here with a human, a soldier no less, talking about escaping the life that had been forced upon her. But here she was, and for the first time, she felt like she had someone who truly cared. Thank you, David, she whispered, for seeing me, for understanding. David smiled, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. It's the least I can do. And in that quiet moment, under the light of 2 moons, the bond between them grew even stronger. They were no longer just a diplomat and a princess. They were 2 people, friends, bound by a shared understanding of what it meant to be free. Days passed quickly after that evening, and the bond between David and Princess Lyra grew stronger. They spent more time together, but now the stakes were higher. Their connection had become more than just a friendly alliance. Lyra's desire for freedom had taken root. David had promised to help her find a way out of the rigid world she had been forced into. But there were complications. The royal palace, once a symbol of security and tradition, had started to feel like a prison to Lyra. Every day she was reminded of the expectations placed upon her. Her father, King Zoran, was growing increasingly impatient with her apparent lack of interest in her royal duties. The pressure to marry and secure a political alliance was unbearable. The king wanted her to marry a powerful general from a neighboring planet, someone who would strengthen the Draxian Empire. But Lyra had no intention of following through with that plan. She didn't want a political marriage. She wanted to live her life on her own terms. David could sense the tension growing between them. But he also knew that the deeper they got into this, the more dangerous it became. The king was no fool. He had long suspected that his daughter's feelings were changing, and he had already warned her that rebellion would not be tolerated. One morning, as David and Lyra walked through the palace gardens, their peaceful stroll was interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind them. David turned and saw a group of the king's guards approaching. They were dressed in their formal armor, their faces stern and unreadable. Lyra's expression immediately shifted, and David could feel the tension in the air. "Princess Lyra," one of the guards said, his voice respectful but firm. "The king requests your presence in the council chamber, now." Lyra's eyes darkened, and she hesitated for a moment. She had known this was coming. The king's patience had run out. He had given her plenty of time to accept her duties, but now he was ready to force her hand. "I will be there shortly," she replied, her voice calm but firm. The guards nodded. But before they left, the leader of the group, a tall and imposing figure, gave David a sharp look. He knew who David was: a human diplomat, an outsider, someone who wasn't supposed to get too close to the royal family. But the growing friendship between David and Lyra was no secret. Lyra's shoulders slumped, and she let out a heavy sigh. "This is it," she muttered. "I can feel it. My father is going to demand that I marry him today." David placed a hand gently on her shoulder, trying to offer comfort. "You don't have to do it, Lyra. You've made your choice. You can still walk away from this." She shook her head slowly, her violet eyes filled with uncertainty. "I wish it were that simple. My father will never allow it. If I defy him, I'll be banished, or worse." She looked at him, her voice filled with a quiet desperation. "I don't know what to do anymore." David stepped closer, his voice steady and determined. "You don't have to do it alone. We can figure this out. I'll help you." For a moment, Lyra just looked at him, her eyes searching his face. Then, with a soft smile, she nodded. "Thank you, David, but I have to face him. I can't run forever." David knew she was right. She couldn't just run away. But he also knew that Lyra had the strength to stand up for herself, even if it seemed impossible. He had seen it in her from the start, the quiet strength, the determination to be true to herself. "I'll be there with you. No matter what happens," David said, his voice full of resolve. "We'll face this together." Lyra's eyes softened, and she placed her hand over his. "I don't know what I would do without you." They walked together to the council chamber, the heavy doors standing between them, and a confrontation neither of them was ready for. When they entered, the room fell silent. The king sat at the far end of the long table, flanked by his advisors. His eyes locked onto Lyra as she approached. David could feel the weight of the situation hanging in the air. "Lyra," King Zoran said, his voice cold and commanding, "I trust you've thought about our conversation. The time for games is over. You will marry General Varek. It is the only way to secure our future." Lyra stood tall, her back straight, despite the unease in her chest. "I will not marry him, father." The room went silent. The king's eyes narrowed. "Wait, what did you say?" "I will not marry him," Lyra repeated, her voice steady but filled with a quiet defiance. "I will not live my life according to your plan. I will make my own choices." King's face darkened with anger. "You're my daughter, Lyra. You have no choice in this matter. The Draxian people expect you to fulfill your duty. If you refuse, you will be stripped of your title and exiled from this palace." "Do you understand?" Lyra's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. She looked at David, standing beside her, and felt a surge of strength. She wasn't alone in this. "I understand, father," Lyra said softly, "but I refuse to follow a path that isn't mine. I will not be your pawn any longer." The king's fists clenched, but before he could speak, David stepped forward, his voice calm and respectful. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, your daughter is not your property. She is her own person, and she has the right to choose her own path, just as any ruler would." David's words were clear, but there was a firmness in his tone that spoke volumes. For a moment, there was only silence. The king's gaze shifted between David and Lyra, his anger palpable. But in that silence, Lyra felt something shift within her, a sense of clarity, of freedom that she had never felt before. "I will not marry General Varric," Lyra said, her voice unwavering. The king's eyes narrowed. "Then you have made your choice, and you will live with the consequences." David and Lyra stood side by side, ready for whatever came next. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, Lyra felt like she was in control of her own destiny. And no matter what her father said, she would fight for the life she wanted. The days after the council meeting were tense. King Zoran had made his displeasure clear, and the threat of exile hung over Lyra like a storm cloud. But despite the anger and the fear, something inside her had shifted. For the first time in her life, she was standing up for what she believed in, not just doing what was expected of her. And David was there, supporting her every step of the way. Lyra spent most of her time in the palace, alone with her thoughts. She couldn't shake the image of her father's angry face, nor the weight of the decision she had made. The king was not a man to back down easily, and his wrath could destroy everything she had ever known. But the thought of living her life in the same cage she had been in all these years was unbearable. One evening, David came to her quarters, his face serious. "Lyra, we need to talk." She looked up from the window where she had been staring out at the distant horizon. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the palace, but it didn't offer any comfort. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tired. "We can't stay here forever," David said, his tone urgent. "Your father won't let this go. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to leave. We have to make a choice, a real one." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She knew what he meant. They couldn't hide in the palace forever. If they were going to escape, they would have to act soon before her father could stop them. But the idea of leaving everything behind, the only life she had ever known, was terrifying. "I don't know if I can do it," Lyra said quietly, her voice breaking. "What if it's too late? What if I can't escape him? What if I lose everything?" David moved closer, his eyes soft with understanding. "Lyra, you're stronger than you think. You have the courage to make this choice, even if it's hard. And you don't have to do it alone. I'm here with you." She looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. David had become more than just a diplomat to her. He was her ally, her friend, her only hope for a future outside the walls of the palace. But the path they were about to take was dangerous. If they ran, they risked everything. There was no turning back. "I've made up my mind," Lyra said, her voice stronger now. "I won't live my life in a cage anymore. I'll choose my own destiny, no matter what the cost." David nodded, a look of determination in his eyes. "We'll do this together. We'll find a way." That night they planned their escape in secret. The palace was full of guards, spies, and servants, all loyal to the king. If anyone discovered their plan, it would be the end of everything. But Lyra was done hiding. She was done being afraid. They decided to leave under the cover of darkness, slipping out of the palace quietly before the guards could stop them. A ship to take them away, a small but fast vessel that could carry them to a distant planet where they could start anew. But even as they made their preparations, Lyra couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision. What if it didn't work? What if her father found out? Just as they were about to leave, a knock on the door startled them. Lyra's heart raced, and David quickly stepped in front of her, his hand on the handle of his weapon. They both held their breath, waiting for the sound of footsteps to fade. But there was no sound of retreat. The door opened slowly, and standing there in the doorway was one of Lyra's closest advisors, a woman named Alara. She was a trusted confidant, one who had helped guide Lyra throughout her life. But now standing there with a look of concern on her face, Lyra wondered whose side Alara was really on. "Alara," Lyra said, trying to keep her voice steady. "What is it?" "I've heard rumors," Alara said quietly, stepping into the room. "The king is furious. He plans to have you locked away before the day ends. He won't let this go. Lyra, you must reconsider. If we leave now, there will be no turning back." Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. Her worst fear had come true. Her father was already planning his next move. The king wasn't just angry, he was prepared to act. The moment they left the palace, they would be considered fugitives. "I know what I'm doing," Lyra said, her voice firm. I've made my choice, and I'm not going to turn back. I won't live my life as a puppet any longer. I'll take whatever comes." Lara's expression softened, but there was fear in her eyes. "Please think carefully, Princess. If you leave, you will be a traitor to your people. Your father will not show mercy." David stepped forward, his voice calm, but filled with conviction. "We've made our decision, Alara. You don't have to agree with us, but we're leaving. Now." For a moment, there was silence. Ilara's gaze flickered between David and Lyra, and then, to Lyra's surprise, the older woman nodded slowly. "I've always known you were strong, Lyra," Ilara said quietly. "If you truly believe this is what's best for you, then go. I won't stop you." Lyra's heart swelled with a mix of gratitude and sadness. She had always trusted Alara, but the truth was that no one could stop her now. Her path was set. "Thank you," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. "I'll never forget this." With one final look, Alara turned and left the room, leaving Lyra and David alone again. The tension in the air was thick, but Lyra felt something. Elsa's sense of clarity. This was the moment of truth. There would be no going back after tonight. They were leaving, for better or worse. David held out his hand to her, his eyes filled with warmth and determination. "Are you ready?" Lyra took a deep breath, the weight of the world on her shoulders, but for the first time in her life, she didn't feel burdened by it. She felt free. She reached out and took his hand. "Let's go," she said, her voice steady. "Together." And with that, they walked out of the room, ready to face whatever the future held. Whatever happened. Next, Lyra knew one thing for certain. She was no longer a prisoner of her past. The darkness of the night had wrapped itself around the palace like a thick blanket, and Lyra could barely make out the silhouettes of the palace walls as she and David made their way through the hidden passageways. They moved quietly, careful, not to make any noise that would alert the guards to their departure. Lyra's heart raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of uncertainty, fear, and excitement. This was it, the moment of no return. Once they left the palace, there would be no turning back. She would be a fugitive, hunted by her father's soldiers. The life she had known, the life of luxury and privilege, was gone. In its place would be uncertainty. But in her heart, she knew this was the only way. This was the only path to freedom. David glanced at her, his face grim but determined. His presence beside her gave her strength. He had become more than just an ally, was her protector, her confidant, and now, her partner in this dangerous escape. "We're almost there," David whispered, his voice barely audible in the still night. "Stay close." Lyra nodded, her hand gripping his tightly. The cool, metallic walls of the passage gave way to the outer door, hidden behind layers of stone. David gently pushed the door open, and they stepped into the cool night air. For the first time, Lyra felt a sense of freedom, even though the danger was far from over. The distant hum of the city echoed through the still night. Lyra's eyes adjusted to the darkness. They had to hurry if they were going to reach the ship David had arranged. It wasn't far, but every second counted. "We'll be safe soon," David assured her, his voice steady. "I promise." Lyra looked at him, her heart full of gratitude. She had never thought she would find someone like him, someone who would stand by her, even when it meant risking his own life. It was a strange feeling knowing that she was no longer alone, that she had someone who understood her struggle. The thought of running away from everything she had known was terrifying, but with David by her side, the fear didn't seem so overwhelming. They reached the edge of the palace grounds and slipped into the nearby forest, where the shadows offered them some cover. The soft crunch of leaves beneath their feet was the only sound as they made their way through the underbrush. Lyra's breath came in quick, shallow gasps, but she kept moving, knowing there was no turning back as they walked. Lyra's thoughts turned to her father. King Zoran had always been a man of power and control. His every decision aimed at maintaining the Draxian Empire's dominance. He had ruled with an iron fist, believing that his way was the only way, but Lyra knew now that he was wrong. She wasn't a puppet to be controlled, and her happiness couldn't be dictated by his demands. David, sensing her thoughts, spoke quietly. "I know this isn't easy, Lyra, but you're doing the right thing." She glanced at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. I hope so, David. I really do. But I can't help but wonder if I'm making a mistake. David stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression soft yet firm. You're not making a mistake. You're choosing your own path. You deserve to live a life where you have the freedom to make your own choices. No, if that means walking away from everything you've known, then so be it. Lyra stared at him for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. He was right. This wasn't just about running away. It was about claiming her own future. She'd spent so many years living under her father's thumb, doing what was expected of her, never questioning the life she had been given. But now, she was choosing for herself. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of control over her own destiny. With a deep breath, Lyra nodded. You're right. Can't live my life in fear anymore. David smiled, his eyes filled with admiration. That's the spirit. We'll make it through this together. They continued on their way, moving faster now, the destination in sight. The ship was waiting for them, hidden among the trees on the outskirts of the forest. It was a small vessel, designed for speed rather than comfort. But it would get them far from the palace, far from the life that had confined Lyra for so long. When they reached the ship, David quickly checked their surroundings, ensuring that no one had followed them. He motioned for Lyra to board first, and she climbed into the small cockpit, her hands trembling as she settled into the seat. The ship was simple but functional, with basic controls and a navigation system that David had programmed to take them to a remote planet far away from Draxian space. David took the seat beside her, his hands moving quickly over the controls. The engines hummed to life, and the ship began to lift off the ground. Lyra looked out the window, watching the palace grow smaller and smaller as they ascended into the sky. For a brief moment, she felt a pang of sadness. This had been her home for so long. But that sadness was quickly replaced by a sense of freedom, a sense of possibility. She was no longer bound by the expectations of her father, no longer trapped in a life she hadn't chosen. She was free. As the ship ascended into the stars, Lyra glanced at David, her heart swelling with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. David smiled, his eyes focused on the controls. No need to thank me. I'm just glad I could be a part of this. Lyra smiled back, her heart light for the first time in years. I couldn't have done this without you. Together, they flew into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Lyra had no idea what the future would hold, but for the first time she was excited to find out. She had made the choice to live her life on her own terms, and that was all that mattered.